Hey there, this is Craig from Bold Strong. Welcome to this episode. Excited today to have a conversation with a friend of mine, Chris Nealon. I've known Chris for quite a long time, and he never fails to really impress me with his depth of knowledge when it comes to advertising, branding, and really believing in a cult-like following in your product. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Chris Nealon. All right, and welcome to the show. This is Craig with Bold Strong. Excited today to have Chris Nealon with me. Chris is a friend of mine that I've known for some time. He's a Calgary business person. He is uniquely smart, uniquely witty, and uniquely curious, and we're going to have a great conversation today. Thanks for coming, Chris. Appreciate you having me here.
I'm thrilled that I got the invite. I'm looking forward to the chat, and I'll do my best to be witty, curious, and smart. As you
Excellent.
claim.
Wonderful. Thanks for coming. All right, Chris. Well, I've known you for some time, and you've been a fascinating business person, and you have some, a fascinating background that brought you to Calgary. And I don't know exactly how I would describe the business that you're in, but maybe you could describe, how do you describe the business that you're in when someone says, "What do you do, Chris?" I don't know what you do. What do you do?
The short answer is I say that I run a marketing advisory firm. That's probably intentionally vague. You could also say if McKinsey and DDB, McKinsey being a business consultant and DDB being a large ad agency, if they had a baby, they might birth something like cult. We intentionally, when we started 10 years ago, tried to create a new species of advisory service that didn't exist at the time. And so there's some challenges with that because people don't readily understand it, but there's some advantages as well because if you create a new game, you get to create all the rules of engagement. And so we've really enjoyed helping teach the marketplace what we are and how we could add value to their business. Okay,
that's interesting. And I guess if you were in business, that would probably make some sense. If you weren't in business, that would be like, I'm not exactly sure what you're telling me right here. But I think one of the things that you talk about a lot is creating this brand awareness, and that's where the name cult came up with, I believe. And is that, or what was the genesis of the name cult?
Actually, it was probably the opposite of that.
Okay.
So when I say that, like if McKinsey and DDB had a baby, so DDB and thousands of ad agencies like them are in the awareness business. They figure out ways to get your brand more popular. And they actually do a pretty good job of that. And their primary tools to do that involve a lot of paid media. They involve a lot of discounting and sales promotions so they can kind of, I like to say, they can shout or bribe their way into people's hearts and minds. What we discovered was that there's actually something better than awareness, and that is advocacy. Because the best person to make you aware of a product or service is not the provider of that product or service. It's a friend or a trusted colleague of yours who tells you about it. So word of mouth has always been more potent than paid media. I just don't think a lot of people know how to generate word of mouth. And so we created Cult to say, who's really, really great at word of mouth? Cults or religions or fraternities, people that learn how to create evangelists and people who grow through this inner circle of people who are sort of handpicked and invited in to join that tribe, that club, that company, whatever it might be. So we were like, wow, if the most adored brands in the world don't just have customers, they have like these raving fans. I was curious. There you go. Curious. Check one of those boxes. Curious. How did they do that?
Right.
How did they get people that don't just know them but love them? And there was very few articles, providers, consultants that were teaching that strategy. And I just thought that was a much more substantive strategy than just how do I become popular? Because a lot of people could know about a brand. It doesn't mean that they are going to use that brand or champion that brand.
Right. And I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't mean that one brand is in particular better at providing a specific product, but that there is a loyalty to a line of products. And so who does it well? Like, is there companies out there that they're just natural at this and this was kind of part of their DNA?
I don't know if I could say that anybody was natural at it. I think that there's hundreds of brands, and we'll talk about the gathering in a few minutes, but it's our attempt to show the world, here's what good looks like. Here's why Levi's has transcended denim and is more than just a pants company. Here's why Porsche has transcended, performance automobiles and has become this lifestyle brand that people, aspire to. There's a lot in the professional sports arena. I mean, sports marketing almost by default taps into how do you convert, a transactional customer who buys a ticket into a raging fan who wears the jersey and merchandises it and has friends over and tries to get his family to, become a Lakers fan, a Cowboys fan, whatever it might be, a Rough Riders fan here in Canada. So we've looked at, admittedly, we're better, our research has done more work on the B2C side than on the B2B side.
Okay.
I don't think it's because B2B is any less capable. I think that they're just less sophisticated in terms of their marketing, and that might be a blunt statement, but we just see a lot more ambition from B2C marketers that are trying to say, as well as probably a bit more competition. When you're in a crowded space, if you're in the spirits space, there's a lot of beverage cult brands, Jack Daniels, Coca-Cola, Gatorade. Like, they have to try to find a different way to compete, and so they sometimes use some of these cult brand principles more proficiently than, say, a person that's selling B2B copiers or, consulting services or something like that. But yeah, I mean, some of my favorite cult brands would include Lego. I mean, the big three are Apple, Nike, and Starbucks. I mean, those people kind of say, well, I dismiss those for whatever reason. They think that they don't qualify. But, here in Canada, Tim Hortons, which has been fascinating because I think they've taken a couple steps backwards from what was possible. WestJet, same thing. I think WestJet was birthed as a cult brand that has maybe lost their way as they've gotten bigger, and that's pretty common. Particularly as you go public, a lot of your priorities change, and you start chasing shareholder value as opposed to providing consumer value.
The Economist gets involved and starts talking.
Yeah, other people that weren't part of the noble origin story.
Right.
We love founders because usually founders, really good founders like a Richard Branson who started Virgin, a great cult brand, they just have a different mandate about being significant. And unfortunately, as they leave, their replacements start to replace significance with just financial success. And it's very hard to find a cult brand that isn't wildly financially successful, but that's an outcome. That's not an objective. And that's where I think a lot of people get it wrong, is they just chase financial success. And there's a lot of companies that can be successful, but they don't have any meaningful significance in people's lives.
You're talking about some of the biggest companies because they're ones in the media and we know about them. Can this be translated into a small company environment?
It absolutely can. It should be because, again, if one of the symptoms of a cult brand is that they spend less on paid media, there's a lot of small companies that almost feel like they're handicapped by not having a big media budget. Well, if I can't buy a Super Bowl commercial, if I don't have millions of dollars, it's like, that's a good thing. That's a blessing, not a curse, because Lululemon got to $3 billion before they started using any sort of paid media campaign.
It's amazing.
So wouldn't you be curious to know how they did that? What did they invest in? How did they put energy into building that community? Yeti, one of my favorite cult brands, the same thing. Like, these are not the world's largest advertisers.
Yeah.
The way like Procter and Gamble or General Mills products might be. So I think a small business is actually better equipped because they have less bad habits to break. They don't need big budgets, but they do have to think a little bit differently about what they're trying to do. Are they trying to just achieve financial success, or are they trying to make a difference or achieve some significance in some way? And it doesn't have to be like, Patagonia is trying to save the world in terms of natural places. Lush Cosmetics is trying to change the way that people put toxins on their body. It doesn't have to be that dramatic.
Right.
It could be something in a smaller corner of the universe where you just are trying to say, for this customer, I'm trying to provide something beyond just a transaction.
So if we're looking at a small business who's we're coming out of COVID, there's a lot of companies that essentially were all startups again. We did nothing for the last 18 months. is there like a 1, 2, 3 checklist that I need to do to make sure that I'm at least getting going on this road?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if it's a 1, 2, 3 checklist. I think first would be this attitude of necessity is the mother of invention. So do not race to get back to your old habits, but use it as a chance to, level set everything. I was actually consulting with Starbucks when the first recession hit in 2008, 2009. I remember the CMO grabbed his 3-ring binder and threw it across the room in dramatic effect and said, nothing that got us here is relevant to where we need to go.
Wow.
And it was like, I loved that sort of clean slate it and assume nothing. So do we have to get new, coming out of the recession, I'd say, this pandemic, I think the first thing you have to understand is, has there been some substantive difference to the marketplace? Either has the competitive set changed? Have certain people gone out of business so you can steal that share? Have new people come into your space? Had the consumer consumption habits changed? We have a client that does commercial real estate. Like, they're in trouble because people are just thinking differently about remote work. We have a client that's in the real estate business. They're thriving because people are upgrading their homes and they're thinking differently about, what their home offices are going to look like. So I think you have to kind of say, get a gut check with some real data to say, has our market changed in a meaningful way? I think you should also look at how were you spending your money. I would argue, there's an old time adage that says half of your advertising budget's wasted. The problem is you just don't know which half. And so, you should say there's a lot of companies that have pulled back dramatically on their digital marketing, on their paid media. A lot of, B2B marketers used to go to, I have a client that would go to 20 trade shows a year. And just think about, forget the $10,000 to $50,000 for the booth. That's salespeople, that's flights, that's time away from other things. And they were just doing it out of habit. Like, well, this is just what we always do. And that's like the worst reason to do anything. Sure. Is because you've always done it. So I really sit back and get a blank sheet of paper and to say, if we were to do this over again, what would we do differently? And hopefully you do it with some data about either what's worked previously or some insights from the marketplace about how their needs have changed.
Do you approach it at all from the the consumer perspective and say, and you're saying this is what's changed in the environment? Do you look at that and build around that? Is that kind of a bit of the idea? You still have the same product possibly, or you have to modify it, but you look at the client and say, the client's now wanting it delivered this way or supplied in a different way or in a different box, or there's no physical location or what have you. So, but you have to go to the consumer and say, what are they looking for now?
Yeah, but I'd argue you should do that whether we had a pandemic or not. The pace of change is incredible. I like to say one of my professional lowlights was counseling with Blockbuster through their demise until they went bankrupt. That was a company who was asleep at the wheel and not paying attention to the socioeconomic macro trends that were upon us. So, yeah, I think I always like these exercises. Sometimes we'll work with clients on sort of these disruption exercises of what would you do to put yourself out of business, and then just assume there's some sharp kids in a master's class someplace figuring out a way to do that. And so how do you either beat them to the punch? How do you acquire them? How do you create something that would thwart that threat? So I don't think any business leaders should ever rest on their laurels that kind of what got us to here is going to be what gets us to there.
Is that and you think of, I think of business people I know, and, I think there's a number of them that are exhausted today. And it's like, wow, Chris is telling me I got to do more work now. I got to go out and think again, and I can't just go back and do it the way I was doing it. So it's going to be an interesting next year, maybe. Is it going to be the 12 months of everyone's going to sit down, take a deep breath, and try to figure out how to do this all over again? It's a bit of a restart.
Yeah, and hopefully we're a bit well rested because I think that we've had a chance to have that reset was done to us. We've never faced a situation where the government started imposing restrictions on what we can and cannot do. I know for my business, most of our clients are south of the border.
Right.
I'm just pulling my hair out, literally, that I can't get across the border without punitive effect with those quarantines. And so, obviously the service sector, the restaurants, the massage parlors, the beauty salons, those ones have all been decimated. So, hopefully we are re-energized, and we've either made these decisions. Do I have the energy and the intestinal fortitude to fight this fight again, or should I retire, or should I, go get a different job? I think there's been all sorts of awakenings. My own personal awakening. I'm relocating back to the States. It causes you to kind of reevaluate what your priorities are. But yeah, listen, business is a contact sport. And if you're not coming into it in fighting shape with the right sort of mindset, maybe you should, support somebody who is doing that versus shouldering that burden yourself.
Right. Now, one of the things that, you're bringing up, we have to re-envision some of the stuff we're doing. One of the things that you've become passionate about is this gathering that you've done, and you're going to tell us a little bit about that, I hope. And, and not just that, having these big events where there's people talking and, we can access people on YouTube all day long. But this has been a unique opportunity for business people to think outside of what their common thoughts are. So tell us about the gathering. Tell us about how that's been valuable and, what value that brings to business people today.
So the gathering's in its 9th year now. This year was our first attempt at doing it all virtually, and it was successful enough that I think that will forever be a component, although there's just no way to completely replace the immersive experience of being in a room at this 200-year-old castle in the Rocky Mountains of Banff. And so I think that in an ideal state, there'll always be a live and virtual component, because it's expensive, it's inconvenient. So the fact that more international people, the fact that maybe smaller business owners who couldn't afford a $1,200 ticket could be able to say, I can log in at least and cherry pick some of the content. But it really boils down to this concept of a professional role model. Right. I think role models are so important, but we tend to think of them as like, how to be a good father, or how to get in shape, or how to be a better communicator. I don't know that we have businesses that we say, I want to be like that business. And the data is just really clear that if you have a good role model, you will avoid more mistakes, and you'll have less of a clumsy trajectory to your desired end state. And it's easy as a consultant to share stories, but I'm biased. I want to tell you these stories so you'll pay me to come in and help you do it. So everybody kind of views my point of view as a bit jaded or skeptical, versus if I can just get, one of my favorites was Dana White from the UFC there. And it's like, just listen to Dana. Don't take my word for it. Listen to him. And so we try to get these iconic brands because they are a bit of a draw. So if Marvel or Disney, show up, people will say, I love those brands, so I want to listen to them. But where people sometimes fall short is they don't write themselves into that story. They think of it as an interesting piece of content, not an example that I can follow, even though we do our best to say, listen, Marvel declared bankruptcy. Marvel was at zero, and they've now built this multi-billion-dollar studio. So if you're not at zero, you're further along than they were. So, right. Tim Hortons started as a tiny donut shop. They're now, one of Canada's most beloved brands. So I think that we need to be a bit more creative to find out what part of their story can be applied to us. And we'll send about 40 or 50 of these brands into the gathering and just basically give them an hour each to, this year we had Barbie and Land Rover and Amazon and Netflix. And then we honor them as sort of being best in class for that year. So we try not to call them winners, but we call them honorees. Right. And it's been one of the professional highlights of my life. I actually like honoring them, but what I like better is what happens behind the scenes for 6 months. In fact, we're just getting ready to start it again, the evaluation process. So we'll have to look at hundreds of brands. I'll have to get on the phone with dozens of them who are willing to participate. And like last year, I remember I love barbecue culture. I'm a Texan, and so I think it's in my DNA there. But I didn't know much about Traeger grills. And then it comes across my radar. I start to do the due diligence on them. I get the CEO on the phone, and it just blows my mind.
Wow.
And I just am sitting here saying, if every CEO or marketer could just listen to this guy for an hour, you would change your behavior. You would change your belief system about why are you in business and what can you actually accomplish. Because this guy's just selling expensive metal grills at the base level. But what he's created is a community of barbecue enthusiasts who receive these grills like it's Christmas morning.
Wow.
And it's really quite impressive. And he's taken his business from 25 million to 300 million in like 8 years. Wow. I'm like, well, who doesn't want to do that? And why aren't you just doing what he did? Because he's telling you the playbook. He's laying it out there for you.
Yeah. You know what's fascinating? And I think it's worth underscoring this idea that you can have a business role model, not just a personal. Because I think we're inundated with personal role models. You're my role model, and I'm yours, I'm sure.
Sure.
And,
I'll play along, yes.
But, it's interesting that you could have a business role model. That's a fascinating, important note that you're making there, that you're, And how do you find those people? Like, I guess you just have to go out and look and say, who's winning? Right.
Well, that's what we did. So, I mentioned offline here that, one of the most seminal business books of my lifetime was Jim Collins' Good to Great. And he had suggested, that came out almost exactly 20 years ago. And he had sort of reverse engineered, well, let's use a financial KPI, in this case, stock performance, find the overachievers, and then see if you could reverse engineer some type of pattern.
Right.
And that for 20 years, that book has been guiding business leaders. We've tried to do the same thing. We're not as prolific as Jim Collins is, but we've tried to say, what if stock performance wasn't your goalpost?
Right.
What if it was an irrational loyalty and fandom for your brand, what we call cult status? And that exists in 3 categories. It exists for customers. Do your current customers buy more product more often at higher price? But it also exists with prospects. Like, I don't drink, but I understand that Jack Daniels has achieved a level of cult-like status. Somebody else might not have kids, but you can appreciate what Disney has done in terms of family entertainment. And then the third is staff, which was a pleasant surprise for us. We didn't go into this exercise understanding the role of culture or of internal engagement. I remember Airbnb was a huge I think, catalyst for our thinking of understanding how much time and money the internal leadership team spends on internal issues, particularly the marketing department. I hope that over the next several years, the marketing department and the HR department will become much closer bedfellows, because the correlations are just, if you're a great company to work for, you have a much higher likelihood of becoming a great company to work with or to buy from. And it's really difficult to find brands that have heightened levels of external enthusiasm that's not exceeded by the internal enthusiasm. Like, if you're paying people and they're not as lathered up about who you are and what you're doing, it's really hard to find customers that are going to be that excited about who you are and what you're doing.
Is there, just maybe jumping back to some of these brands that have cult-like status, is there any new up-and-comers? And, something you said, because you said lathered up, I thought of this, is it Dr. Squatch soap?
This new soap thing? Yeah.
Holy smokes. That's a pretty cool brand.
It's super cool. And every year at the gathering, we have these established brands, but then we also do what we call emerging cult brands. Okay. And one of the qualifications is less than 10 years old. One of the qualifications is they tend to be regional. Like, there's just some really, like Costa Sunglasses is this remarkable brand, but if you're not like a high-end angler fisherman, you don't know as much about it. Or you might get something like an In-N-Out Burger, which is a remarkable cult brand, but it kind of exists in the southwestern United States. So, or Dunkin' Donuts, or Wawa is a great one out in Philadelphia. So we do try to find those because they have all the DNA of a cult brand. And, whether it's Dollar Shave Club, which completely revolutionized how Gillette, who ended up buying them, I believe, or Unilever. We love... this past year, we did Smoke's Poutineery, which is, poutine's got its own little cult-like following just as is in Canada. But this is one guy who actually used to work for an ad agency, a branding firm, who started this quick serve restaurant. And I would argue just on the strength of his personality, his charisma, his quirkiness. He didn't know the 8 cult brand principles in terms of how we've defined them, but he just went down the list and created something highly relatable, crazy remarkable, purpose-driven, and he's now got stores all over the world. Wow. And it was just like but it goes back to this idea of he wasn't just trying to start another franchise. He was trying to change the establishment. He was this more of like a pirate or an insurgent coming in to dethrone the incumbents. And he was outgunned, he's outmanned. So he, out of necessity, said, well, I got to market differently. And I would just argue that he was marketing better. And that's what cult brands try to do, is they don't try to buy their way into their status.
Interesting. So, and you mentioned the 8 things that you need to do. Where can people get more information on that? This is your opportunity to plug yourself.
Yeah, shameless plug. Well, so we do our best to, we almost feel like missionaries. We're trying to tell the whole world about them. So there's a book called Fix, Break the Addiction That It's Killing Brands. You can find that on Amazon.
We'll link to that.
There's a podcast called Cult Brand Secrets, where you can go and get that content. There's this event that you can buy tickets to for the gathering. And then on our website, cultideas.com, there's daily posts and case studies and examples where you could just come and literally just soak in the examples after examples across any industry: apparel, fashion, jewelry, automotive. Like I said, we're probably lighter in the B2B space than I'd like to be. That's going to be a real priority of mine, as well as we're very North American. We have taken our show on the road. We've been to Barcelona, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Croatia, of all places. Wow. But the examples are less relevant because, everybody's heard of Coca-Cola. But like, we were in Croatia working with a furniture and bed manufacturer, and their competitive set is different. But we've been pleased. We haven't found a place that probably third world countries is where it's less important, because that's just the functional delivery of goods. They go to the store, there's one brand of sugar, there's one brand. But once you get into first world countries where there's really a plethora of choice, I think the cult brand principles become the difference, between good and great. I like to use the example of, what would you guess, Craig, is the best-selling peanut butter in North America?
Well, I would have said Kraft, but it's clearly can't be the answer.
Kraft's a great guess because of their prolific distribution. I mean, Kraft's a gigantic company. Right. When I look at something as commoditized as peanut butter, they're all made with peanuts. Yep. They're essentially all sold in the same package. Yep. Some people get cute and they mix it with the jelly or something like that. But you're kind of like, you go to the store, you have 10 options. They're all brown. They're all made with peanuts. Some have more preservatives, less sugar, no salt. But like if that was your job, was to sell peanut butter, what would you do? And so if everybody did the same thing, you'd argue they'd all have 10% market share. They have 10 choices, but they don't. One brand has nearly 40% market share, which means it's not only but it means everybody else is like in the single digits. Wow. And it's Jif.
Wow.
And it's because Jif decided a long time ago, we're not going to be in the peanut butter business. We're going to be in the helping mom business. And, choosing moms choose Jif wasn't just a brilliant advertising tagline. It spoke to the ethos of the business and what they're going to try to do. And they're going to help mom not feel guilty about giving a kid a peanut butter and jelly sandwich when she doesn't have time to make them dinner, right? The mom's got a lot on her plate, particularly dual income households and all this kind of stuff. And they're going to find recipes for mom. They're going to provide support groups and communities for mom. Like, if you go to the Jif website, you're kind of overwhelmed with this feels like a charity, like a social service.
Are we still talking about peanut butter?
We're talking about peanut butter, right? And so that's an example of, as you get into hyper commoditized categories, stop talking about features and price points and start standing for something different, and people will start to reward you for having a bigger impact in their life than just, I need some peanut butter.
Wow. Well, and you know what's a really fascinating brand that, and because I have a motorcycle, is Harley Davidson becoming what is a luxury brand. And, and a lot of people would look at Harley and think, well, that's a dirty old bike, But now, if you own a Harley, you have to own a Harley jacket, a Harley pants, Harley hat, a Harley glasses, everything is Harley Davidson. So it became a really fascinating study on luxury brands and cult followings. Fascinating, actually.
So when we built Colt, we were trying to think of what would be the outcome if we were to position ourselves and price ourselves and improve our IP to such a way that the dream client would call us up and pay us top dollar for our services. We put Harley on that pedestal.
Right.
And I don't really subscribe to the idea of like The Secret or like karma or like putting stuff out into the universe. I don't know how I feel about that, but something about that situation did reciprocate where Harley did call 3 weeks after we launched Colt in 2012. And so we had the privilege of working with Harley for 3 years, and it was everything I wanted it to be. Where they walked the walk as much as the outside perception of them would be. Now, they were also incredibly self-aware of major headwinds. In fact, our engagement was less about get the Harley diehards to buy more merch. It was 5 discrete audiences that they were losing with: women, immigrants, inner city, urban. The other 2 escape me right now, but it was like there's a whole generation of people or a genre of people or cohort of people that were not growing up aspiring to have that easy rider sort of lifestyle, the 55 to 65-year-old kind of white guy dream, midlife crisis, whatever you want to call it. So I really respected Harley for not resting on their laurels. Like, they weren't even solving a 12-month problem. They were solving a problem that they were anticipating having down the road. And they were one of the first speakers at the gathering, the very first gathering. Wow. And one of the things that I remember was their head marketer said, we spend 85% of our discretionary marketing dollars on customers, not on prospects.
Wow.
And there was an audible gasp in the room, because that's like literally the polar opposite of what most people do. Most people spend 80 or 90% of their dollars trying to get new people into the brand. And then if they're doing any sort of CRM or customer growth, it's tiny. But Harley, I think, has the second most effective loyalty program on the planet. I think Amazon Prime is the first, but the HOG group, Harley Owners Group, is not a points-based, you have all these sort of lame plastic cards in your wallet for grocery stores and hotels. Like, this is a community, and they spend so much money on that lifestyle, because the best way to get you to buy a Harley is if all your friends have a Harley. Right. And now you feel left out because you're not going for the Sunday ride with everybody. And then, as you say, you don't want to show up in your non-Harley gear. You want to start doing customizations is the biggest part of their profitability, right? So you buy the base bike, but then you spend thousands on all the upgrades and different things. You would know that. You're a tinkerer in the garage. And so I just think Harley is such a brilliant example. And again, I said to all the attendees, who here can acknowledge that Harley Davidson's an iconic cult brand? And people like to joke that Harley's the second most tattoo in the world besides Mom. Mom is number 1 and Harley Davidson's number 2. So it's like, if you want customers to love you so much to tattoo you on your body, then the question is, why aren't you doing what Harley has done to do that? He just told you his playbook for the past hour. And my guess is most people are going to walk away saying, I don't, they're the exception, I don't qualify, I couldn't. And they make all these excuses, and that's why they remain mediocre. And that it really is, it's not the playbook that's the hard part, it's the courage. It's that leap of faith to go and do something that sounds non-intuitive or goes against maybe something you learned when you got your master's degree or your MBA or something.
Right. It's funny when you drive a Harley and, there's a wave. Yeah, you do to other Harley drivers.
Yeah, Jeep as well. Jeep has the little
you give a little wave, but it's funny because there's a bit of a shaming that goes on, because maybe you don't wave at the guy on the other bike. Well, I'd wave at you, but you don't have a Harley, so you're gonna have to step up here a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know what that means from a social, human standpoint, but as a business guy, I love it. I don't like shaming people, but I do like I like tribes. I like a good cult brand. There are people that get it, and there's people who don't. And you don't make apologies for the people who don't. And so if you're going to be a Honda guy or a Kawasaki guy, great. Yeah. But you're not part of my tribe. And so we don't go out of our way to water ours down so that it welcomes everybody. It can be, you're kind of with us or you're against us kind of attitude.
And I guess part of the whole picture is you can't be Harley and create junk. There's no pass. Well, you still have to create a product.
The first of the 8 cult brand principles is be remarkable. It's very hard. Unfortunately, what happens is there's way too many people that have a mediocre offering and they have exceptional marketing. And they just spend all of their time, what we call putting lipstick on pigs.
Right.
Cult brands are the opposite. Their product is so remarkable that they almost don't need to advertise. In fact, we were consulting with Geek Squad back in the day, and I attribute the quote to Robert Stevens, the CEO, although somebody told me he got it from somebody else. But he says advertising is the tax that brands pay for being unremarkable. So you're going to pay some money.
Interesting.
You have to decide, are you going to put that money into improving your remarkability, or are you going to put that money into telling people that you're remarkable? Elon Musk was on Joe Rogan, which looks like you're aspiring to be here. And he had this great point about the biggest reason, because I think like 95% of new product launches fail, which is just such an
Shocking.
absurd number. I was like, why is anybody trying when you have a 95% failure rate? But he says the biggest problem with entrepreneurs is that they only do things that are incrementally better. So if you're 10 or 20% better than the current alternative, you have to spend a disproportionate amount of time and energy, whether it's sales forces or email marketing or print ads, whatever you choose, trying to convince people that switching is worth a 10 or 20% benefit. But when Tesla came out, it was 200% better than the Prius, right? It wasn't marginally better electric vehicle, everything about it. And he intentionally, like their SUV had the X-Wings. Yeah. You don't need X-Wings on the car, but it made it demonstrably different. And, the size of the screen and some of the cool things that they've done, when over Christmas, your car could like sing you a Christmas carol and the lights were going and the doors were, it was obnoxious. Like, why do that? Well, 3 million people filmed their car wishing them a Merry Christmas and put it on YouTube, and all of a sudden everybody's saying, what is this? Tesla has 10x the Google search volume as any other automotive brand, and they spend zero money on advertising.
It's amazing.
Right? And all the other automotive brands are begging for people's attention, and instead Elon says just give them something worthy of their attention. So I do think that's one of the bitter pills for small business owners to understand, is that they've probably put too much energy in being just slightly better. Right. And in reality, they should have been dramatically better.
Yeah, and it's a, in small business, it's one of the big questions everyone always asks. So what makes you different? And if it's a hard question to answer, that's going to be a problem. Yeah. I think down the road, you need to be, like you said, dramatically different. It's not turning a dial. It's like getting a new dial.
Well, and it's also, I struggle with the word different or differentiation, because sometimes we pursue different for different sake, so we can answer that question. I prefer the words distinct and desirable. Distinct should be there's something obviously different where this could never have come from the competitor. But if it's not paired with desirability, you can spend a lot of time putting features into things that aren't meaningfully desirable by your target audience. And so that's where a lot of, I think, particularly in the tech space, we'll take BlackBerry as a great example. I mean, BlackBerry got their butts kicked by the smartphone kind of generation, because they started putting a lot of energy into talking about these features and benefits. Or actually, a better example even than BlackBerry, one of my favorite cult brands is Beats by Dre. I mean, the technology inside Beats by Dre is no different than the technology of what it was previously, which was Monster headphones. Right. But the marketing team at Monster was speaking geek to audiophiles. Right. And when Johnny Iovine bought it, he was just like, let's just make this thing irresistible to, either rap culture or music lovers, and, the association with Dr. Dre. It was all branding. It was all marketing. They didn't improve the head. They changed the casing so it looked more distinct. Right. Remember for the Vancouver Olympics where it kind of launched, they gave all the athletes, like Michael Phelps was walking around with these red headphones, and people were like, what's he wearing? Because everything else before that was kind of like Sony Walkman looking headphones. But other than that, which again was all kind of superficial stuff, it didn't make the sound any better. He just made people crave it. And crave it to where they would pay 2 or 3 times. Again, it wasn't 20% more expensive than the alternative. It was twice as expensive. Right. as the alternative, and that added to the desirability. The way Nike, the way Jordans back in the day, where everybody wanted one, but you couldn't afford them because they were so expensive, and so you found ways to do chores around the house to just save up your money because you bought an irresponsibly priced pair of sneakers.
There's an interesting message in there, and to underline that, it's that your product can be very, very similar, but there's something more to it than just the similarity of the usability or whatever. It has to become something that people want.
Yeah, and I think you need to look at all the marketing, if you take its purest sense, dealt with product, price, place, and promotion back in the day. And unfortunately, most marketing departments today, I don't even call them marketing departments, I call them markdowning departments. They're just in the administration of sales and promotions. And if you get back to, is this product as incredible as it should be? So when I think of a Yeti or a Lush or a Tesla, these cult brands, like most of their energy is going into superior product offering.
Right.
But then there's also pricing strategies. And I think people can be so much, particularly in the B2B space, we see a huge push to subscription-based services. We're seeing a big push towards different types of creative bundling, different options around service level agreements. So I think people can get really much more creative. I would argue, Craig, even your industry of staffing, I think, this idea of why are we married to 20 or 30% of first year salary. I'm on the board of a company here locally called Bode, which is reimagining real estate commissions, and why are we paying these exorbitant fees to real estate agents, particularly in hot markets where houses are flipping in 30 days on their own anyway. So it doesn't just have to be the product. It might just change the way it's priced. And then and then where you get it, the distribution strategies, the place, and can you do things that are, it's what I actually think is Coca-Cola's brilliance is they have found a way to say, you can buy a can of Coke for 50 cents at at Costco in a 24 pack, or you can pay $6 for that same can of Coke at a ball game.
Right.
And it's the product isn't any different. The can is still the same, but they're a way to make it available at really any location is quite exciting as well.
I have talked about coming on the show. So
yeah, great.
Probably
I'll put a good word in for you.
Perfect. It was funny because you mentioned Yeti, and it's I'm slightly embarrassed to admit that if I pass a Yeti cooler in the store, I kind of want to buy it. I don't need a cooler. I have more coolers than
particularly a $400 cooler.
Oh, but
right?
I look at that cooler and think I need that cooler. I don't even know why I need it. I don't ever put anything in coolers, but
what surprised me, Yeti is one of my absolute favorite cult brands, and Bill Neff, who runs the marketing for them, came to the gathering 2 years ago and told their tale. But what surprised me is this past Christmas season, I have 3 teenage boys. 80%, 75% of the stores that I went to get them Christmas gifts had some Yeti product.
Is that right?
And these weren't, Sport Check or Bass Pro Shop. These weren't outdoor enthusiast stores.
Wow.
But it was them realizing whether it's a Yeti cap or a Yeti shirt or a Yeti tumbler. It wasn't always necessarily the cooler, but it's like those brands are recognizing they increase their cool factor by drafting off of Yeti's cult-like fandom.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. So one of the other things that we had talked about before we started recording was just this re-envisioning the way business works and the way, we can't just keep being employees necessarily. And we talked to a friend of ours by the name of Rodney Frank recently about IT contracting and the Fiverr environment, the Upwork environment. And you're involved with a company called Communo that you started up, and re-envisioning how people work and where they work, and the whole concept of, do I have one employer or many, or is the employer just completely fluid and I'm just providing a service, out? So tell us about Communo. It's a fascinating business.
Yeah, thanks for bringing them up. It is fascinating. Communo stays within our wheelhouse of the marketing and advertising space, but I have seen similar models for accounting. I've seen similar models for hospitals with nurses. I've seen models with the oil and gas sector where you find a hot well and you have to instantly assemble a gigantic team. In many ways, the model I think was perfected by Hollywood back in the 50s when the large studio, back in the day, like actors like Jimmy Stewart or John Wayne, they worked for a studio. Like they were on contract for a studio. And the studio did everything. And it kind of imploded eventually under their own weight. They couldn't compete against television. Like between the 20s and the 50s, when the only thing to really do to consume that type of content is to go to the movies, you're kind of doing big hit after big hit after big hit. But between the 50s and 70s, now you had a lot of bombs because people could opt out, or they could say, I can get my entertainment on television instead. And so these studios it was now high stakes poker. Like they had to decide which of these were going to hit. Right. If you had too many bombs in a row, you would crumble because your overhead was so high. Home builders, I think, have done a pretty good job as well. I think home builders have learned over the years, you don't need the tile guy or the granite gal or the electrician on staff. You could probably assemble some trades. What you needed is a brand that would attract customers. You needed some maybe project management or general contracting work. And so people started just thinking differently about what can I sell that I don't have to staff?
Right.
And then whatever happened, I don't know, but the data started saying by 2025, 50% of people are going to be self-employed. So I think the gig economy kind of exploded. I think, the generation just below you and I think our generation grew up saying you're not going to work for the same company for your whole life. Right. So you can, don't chase the golden watch and kind of be a bit more opportunistic. But the generation right below us is saying, you might not even have an employer. You might just, be a bit of a free agent. So all these little things, ingredients sort of started to mesh together that in the marketing space, most businesses spend a disproportionate amount of their energy on what the strategy should be. And then when they start thinking about implementation, I think they then invest heavily in the technology, huge enterprise resource systems, point of sale upgrades, e-commerce engines, CRM systems. But what kind of getting neglected is the people. Like, who are the operators that are actually going to do this? And unfortunately, you then find HR departments that are starved of meaningful dollars. They're not able to pay for top talent. They're creating all these, weird perks like bring your dog to work or pinball machines or,
infinite holidays,
beer park, beer cart Fridays. Like they start trying to create low cost perks to say you should work for us, thinking that the only way to implement those strategies is to have a bunch of full-time people.
Right.
And we're actually saying, no, what you need is real-time access to specialists. But if you're going to redo your website, the worst thing to do is to go hire a 4-person team because that website's going to be rebuilt in 6 to 9 months, but their salaries have to be paid for the next several years. And that happens with a whole suite of things that a lot of people are like, well, should we have a presence on Clubhouse or should we do something on TikTok? Or it's like, why would you hire for that until you've proven what it can do for your business? And so it's better to outsource it, maybe bring people in as fractional employees. And so we're really trying to create an ecosystem that makes it very easy to, I sometimes use the Avengers analogy of like, sometimes you need Thor and sometimes you need Spider-Man, sometimes you need the Hulk. You don't have to pay for them. You just have to get them to assemble, do the task, and then disassemble to get off your your P&L.
And that's certainly something that Partner Staffing, a partner company of ours, gets involved in because a lot of our clientele need a nimble staff. And so on one day or for a period of several weeks, they're going to need a very specific skill set, and then that's going to change and then change and then change. And I oftentimes tell people, it's like, look, you don't hire a full-time plumber at your house because your toilet backed up.
Right.
You're going to hire the guy you need at the time you need it for the time span that you need it, and that's it.
Right.
So, and that's kind of the idea of this. So you're providing also an environment as well, more than just the community, but you also have an environmental component too, where people can go if they need to.
Yeah, it's for givers and getters of work, again, within the advertising and marketing and digital ecosystem. So I think there's like 74, maybe you could be a videographer, you could be a podcaster, you could be a copywriter, a mobile app developer, but you're not going to find a dog walker, babysitter, accountant, architect on the site. But yeah, so it's a combination of employers can create postings that people can apply to. But it's also, the other thing about our industry in particular, the advertising and marketing industry, unlike lawyers, accountants, or doctors is there's no barrier to entry.
Right.
Anybody that can draw or write or shoot a video or take a photograph can claim a certain level of expertise and can hang a shingle and can start their own work. So you do need some, what's the social proof that they're as good as they claim they are? So their ability to upload their portfolio, their ability to be vetted and verified. Right. Sort of like if you were going to be in the construction space, you'd want to make sure that they're not felons, that they're properly insured, that they have a certain, certification, something like that. So we try to provide some of that, as well as, frankly, the ethos of Communo is actually more tied to what we call eradicating loneliness. There's just way too many people pounding code in their basement or drawing or writing, and it is a lonely profession. And if you're going to work on your own, you're missing out on that camaraderie, and we're a social species, and so we try to scratch that itch by providing a true community, not just a job board.
Right. So we didn't talk about this earlier, but is something that I like to kind of look at occasionally is, we have this millennial group, this Gen Z group coming up, or whatever we call them, and what's the advice we got to give some of these people? Because these are, we've talked to other people, these are the thought leaders of tomorrow. Like, right, we don't want to create just this, amorphous group of people wandering around doing nothing. What do we got to tell this group of people that they need to think about in order to move forward and be successful? And, how do they work in these community-based environments? How do they find mentors? How do they, some of this stuff. I'm just looking for what's the advice we give that crowd now?
Yeah, I struggle because I've met enough of them that I think they're too diverse of a cohort to just label, those crazy millennials or these entitled generations or these everybody in particular gets a participation trophy. Sure. So I don't know. I believe that we're entering a world of a greater meritocracy than ever before. So you have to be good at what you do, and I think that people have to respect that old idea of 10,000 hours. Like, what craft are you actually going to perfect? And then if you are as good as you claim you are, the tools by which you can be found and sourced are higher than ever before. For the creative entrepreneurs that I deal with, where I get discouraged, is they don't have the business acumen. Like they didn't go to business school. They went to art school, or maybe they're self-taught how to code or how to take video. And so there's a bit of naivety around how do you price your services? How do you work with somebody? Like I know you're a great writer, but that's doing your craft is only half of the job. The other job is how are you selling your services? How are you working with other people? How are you pricing yourself appropriately? So I have found that the creative entrepreneurial class needs a bit more hand-holding into just all the other aspects of entrepreneurship. I mean, even something as simple as how have you incorporated yourself, set yourself up for your tax structure? How are you handling your AR and AP? Like, they don't know. No. Like, you see a lot of boneheaded mistakes, and so we try to save them from themselves, but it does require some humility. Because if you kind of think that you're, the shit and I've got my act together and I don't need anybody else's help, then you're not going to be teachable. Right. And you're going to realize that maybe I see a lot of entrepreneurs that are working harder and earning less than they could be if they had some of these guardrails in place.
And you and I have kids in this group, really, where they're coming right into it. And I really like that you mentioned the meritocracy concept. And I think that's the one that's the hard one to beat into them. It's like, you got to go out there and get it. It's not going to be handed to you. And maybe that's the whole cohort concept of the millennials, is that they all think that they just get it, but it's a meritocracy. They need to understand that.
Maybe the difference was like when we would have graduated, I think you would have thought I can align myself with somebody that can figure this out for me. Because I don't know about you. I mean, you're far more entrepreneurial than I am, but I kind of just figured everybody I knew, A, went to college, and B, when they left college, wanted to go work someplace. And like, I went to John Deere right out of school. Like, the goal was go work for the biggest, most notable brand that will pay you the most to give you the best. And I think a lot more people are A, questioning, is college worth the return on investment? And B, if I want to be an entrepreneur, what's my path? Because I think that's less defined. But I think that this hustle porn culture and this sort of entrepreneur, we put them on pedestals, has somehow done them a disservice because they think if I just get a lot of YouTube followers, or if I just do X, somehow things are going to be easy.
Yeah, the money just starts coming in.
Yeah.
I don't even know where it goes. It just shows up.
Yeah, where it comes from to where it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, I got a check today. I don't even know where it came from. So,
yeah.
No, that's good advice. And and it's interesting because I think this young crowd, you know, there's always the shock of leaving school and leaving home and getting married, and then suddenly you open your mailbox and there's the first ream of bills that you have to deal with, and your mortgage payment and your car payment and your insurance that they've largely been isolated from in the past. So
well, I read something about this is like, not only are people getting married later, they're like moving back in. And like there's a whole second wave of 20-somethings that are living in their parents' basement because they got a peek of what was out there, and the house wasn't as nice and the food wasn't as good. And so I think that's one of my concerns now. They got to make sure that living at home is undesirable enough that the kids will actually want to
You just got to move into the tiny little apartment.
A tiny house. I feel like I suffer more than them.
Yeah. Well, that's what, are you doing that? You're moving to the States so that they can't get to their house anymore? It's like, I don't even know where we live.
I need immigration. I need Canadian border services to prevent my kids from following me.
They're going to be going to the old house, just knocking, Mom, Dad, let us in.
Yeah.
So, well, Chris, it's been wonderful having you. I know you're a busy guy, and I appreciate all the time that you were able to spend with us.
It was a great chat.
Hopefully,
Thanks.
we can talk more, even though you're leaving us off to the warm. I'm going to come visit you.
Yeah, you are welcome.
It's nice and warm. So it's going to be great.
Really, your wife is welcome, and if she wants to bring you, she will.
She needs a driver. So I got to get there. So. Well, I appreciate it, Chris, and we'll stay in touch, and thanks for all the insights, and we'll link to, at the bottom of this video, we'll link to some of those things that you've been doing, some of the books, and
I appreciate that.
To The Gathering and to Communo and all that stuff. So
I appreciate that.
Thanks very much, Chris.
You're welcome.
All right, bye for now.